The recruitment center on New Geneva Station buzzed with activity, as species from across the galaxy lined up for their chance to join the elite Cosmic Defense Initiative. Tall, graceful Valens with their crystalline skin stood beside hulking Korath warriors, while nimble Zephyrian scouts darted between the crowds. At the end of one particularly long line, a young human woman waited patiently, her plain brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail, and her dark eyes scanning the diverse crowd with quiet curiosity. Maya. Chen had arrived on the station 3 days ago aboard a civilian transport from Earth. At 22, she was older than most recruits, having spent 4 years studying xenobiology at the Terran Academy, before deciding that field research wasn't quite right for her. The CDI offered something different, a chance to work alongside alien species in defending the galaxy's peace. What she hadn't expected was the barely concealed amusement from other applicants when they learned her species. Human? The Valen in front of her had asked, his voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. How curious. I thought your kind preferred to stay on your little blue world, tending to your gardens and writing poetry. Maya had simply smiled and nodded, used to such reactions. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, having only made first contact 30 years ago. Most species saw them as peaceful farmers and artists, content to trade their agricultural products and cultural exports for advanced technology. The idea of a human wanting to join an elite military organization struck many as quaint at best. The processing took most of the day. Physical examinations revealed nothing particularly impressive about Maya's capabilities. She was in good health, reasonably fit, and possessed average reflexes for her species. Her psychological profile showed high marks for adaptability and empathy, traits valued in diplomatic roles but not particularly noteworthy for combat positions. The recruitment officers, a mix of different species, exchanged glances as they reviewed her file. "Miss Chen," said Commander Thrix, a reptilian Saurek with golden scales, "your application shows you're seeking assignment to active duty operations. Are you certain you wouldn't prefer a support role? Perhaps cultural liaison or agricultural consultation? We have excellent positions available in those fields." Maya straightened in her chair. "With respect, sir, I want to serve where I'm needed most. I understand humans don't have a military reputation, but I'm willing to prove myself." The commander's vertical pupils dilated slightly, the Saurek equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "Very well. Report to Orientation Base 7 tomorrow at 800 hours. Your training cohort will be designated Phoenix Squadron." That evening, Maya found herself in the station's observation deck, staring out at the swirling nebula that gave New Geneva Station its spectacular backdrop. She wasn't alone. A tall figure in a CDI uniform stood near the viewing port, hands clasped behind his back. As Maya approached, she realized it was a human male, probably in his 40s with graying temples and the weathered look of someone who'd seen considerable action. "First day?" he asked without turning around. "Tomorrow, actually. Maya Chen." She extended her hand in the traditional human greeting. The man turned and shook it firmly. "Captain Marcus Webb, Strategic Operations. Let me guess. They tried to steer you toward cultural work or farming consultation?" Maya nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" Captain Webb chuckled, a sound that held little humor. "Because that's what they think we're good for. Peaceful little humans with our art and our crops. They don't know about the other side of human nature, the part we've kept carefully hidden since first contact." "Other side?" Webb was quiet for a long moment, watching a patrol of sleek CDI fighters cruise past the observation window. "Tell me, Miss Chen, what do you know about human history before the space age?" "The usual, I suppose. Wars, conflicts, gradual progress toward peace and exploration." "Wars." Webb repeated the word softly. "We had so many names for it. The war to end all wars they called the first global conflict, not knowing that barely 20 years later we'd have another one twice as devastating. World War II, 60 million dead. But those were just the big ones. Humans have been fighting for territory, resources, and ideology for thousands of years. We perfected the art of warfare long before we reached for the stars." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "But we're peaceful now. The human colonial government outlawed military expansion decades ago. Outlawed expansion, yes, but not preparation." Webb turned to face her fully. "Your training cohort isn't random, Miss Chen. Phoenix Squadron. Every human recruit for the past 5 years has been assigned to Phoenix Squadron." "Do you know why?" She shook her head. Because Phoenix is the human contingent, small, carefully selected, and trained in methods the other species aren't ready to understand. The galaxy thinks humans are harmless gardeners, and we've worked very hard to maintain that image. But the CDI leadership knows better. They know that when diplomacy fails and conventional tactics aren't enough, sometimes you need someone who understands warfare at a level that peaceful species simply cannot comprehend. Webb reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metal disc, a communication badge, but different from the standard CDI issue. The design was simpler, more angular, with symbols that looked almost ancient despite clearly being manufactured recently. "This is for you," he said, pressing the badge into her palm. "Your real assignment badge. The other recruits in Phoenix Squadron will have them too, when the time comes, when the situation requires it. You'll understand what it means to carry the weight of human military tradition into the stars." Maya stared at the badge, its metal surface warm against her skin. "I don't understand. What exactly is Phoenix Squadron?" "Tomorrow you'll begin training with the other species, learning their methods of peacekeeping and conflict resolution. It's good training and you should take it seriously. But in the evenings you'll have additional sessions. Older methods, human methods, strategies that species which evolved in peaceful cooperation could never fully grasp." The captain turned back to the window. "The galaxy is vast, Miss Chen, and not everything in it values peace and cooperation. There are threats out there that respond only to superior force and tactical brilliance. When those threats emerge, the CDI needs someone who understands that sometimes to preserve peace, you must first master war." As Maya made her way back to her quarters, the badge seemed to grow heavier in her pocket. She thought about the gentle Valen's dismissive comment, about Commander Thrix's assumption that she'd prefer cultural work. Tomorrow she would begin her training alongside beings who had never known the savage competition that had shaped human evolution. They would learn together, train together, but she would carry something extra, a legacy written in the blood of countless battlefields stretching back to humanity's earliest days. The corridor lights dimmed automatically as station night cycle began, and Maya quickened her pace. Whatever Phoenix Squadron truly was, whatever ancient weight her codename would carry, she was ready to embrace it. The galaxy thought it knew what humans were capable of, but they were about to learn that their peaceful farmers had once been the most dangerous predators their world had ever produced. Orientation Bay 7 looked like something between a classroom and a military briefing room. 43 recruits from 17 different species sat in curved rows facing a holographic display that currently showed the CDI emblem, a stylized star surrounded by interlocking rings representing unity among the galaxy's civilized worlds. Maya found herself seated between a young Korath whose tusks barely protruded from his lower jaw and a Zephyrian whose feathered crest kept changing, colors based on her emotional state. "Welcome to Phoenix Squadron," announced Instructor Valdris, a six-armed hexapod whose species had mastered interstellar flight when humans were still discovering agriculture. "You represent the finest candidates from across the galaxy, selected for your unique abilities and potential to serve the greater good." The morning proceeded with standard presentations about CDI history, structure, and basic protocols. Maya took careful notes but noticed something interesting. While most recruits asked questions about diplomatic procedures and peacekeeping methods, the 7 other humans in the group remained notably quiet. They all wore the same standard-issue training uniforms, but Maya caught subtle glimpses of the special badges Webb had mentioned, carefully hidden beneath regulation clothing. During the lunch break, the human contingent naturally gravitated toward each other. Maya found herself at a table with James Morrison, a former colonial engineer, Sarah Kim, who'd left a promising career in stellar cartography, David Okafor, an ex-mining foreman, Elena Vasquez, a former transport pilot, twins Marcus and Maria Santos who'd grown up on a frontier world, and Chen Wei, no relation despite the shared surname, who'd been working in asteroid belt construction. "Anyone else feel like we're the only ones here who actually want to learn how to fight?" Elena muttered, keeping her voice low. James nodded toward a group of Valen recruits engaged in animated discussion about conflict resolution through crystal harmonics. "They're debating whether stunning enemies with sound waves is too aggressive. Meanwhile, the Karath over there are arguing about the ethics of using their natural strength advantage in combat situations." "They're not wrong to think about ethics," Sarah pointed out, "but they're approaching it from a position of assuming everyone wants to be reasonable." David laughed quietly. My grandfather used to tell stories about the corporate mining wars in the outer colonies. Before the colonial government banned military action, humans spent 20 years fighting over asteroid claims. We know what unreasonable looks like. Maya studied her fellow humans, realizing that each of them had come from backgrounds where conflict was common, frontier worlds, dangerous industrial work, or roles that required making hard decisions under pressure. Webb told me something last night. He said Phoenix Squadron isn't really random. Chen Wei leaned forward. You met Captain Webb? Then you got the speech about human military tradition too? You all met him? Different times, different places, Marcus Santos said. Always the same message, though. The galaxy thinks we're farmers and artists, but they need us for something else. What exactly? Maya asked. Elena pulled out her communication tablet and showed a training schedule. Look at this. Everyone else gets standard combat theory, diplomatic resolution protocols, and peacekeeping methods. Our evening sessions are listed as cultural integration studies. Sarah smirked. Cultural integration, right. Because learning how to plan complex military operations is definitely cultural. The afternoon brought their first practical exercises. The other species demonstrated impressive natural abilities. Korath strength, Valen energy manipulation, Zephyrian speed and agility. When Maya's turn came to show human capabilities, she managed a respectable performance on the obstacle course, but nothing that stood out compared to her alien classmates. Adequate mobility, Instructor Valdris noted, marking something on his evaluation pad. Reasonable problem-solving approach. Miss Chen, your species seems well suited for support roles requiring persistence and adaptability. That evening, while the other recruits attended social gatherings and recreational activities, the 8 humans reported to a different section of the station. The room they entered looked nothing like the bright open spaces of the main training facilities. Darker, more cramped, with equipment that seemed designed for serious business rather than educational demonstrations. Captain Webb stood at the front alongside another human, a woman with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, and scars that spoke of real combat experience. Recruits meet Colonel Sandra Hayes, formerly of Human Colonial Defense Force Special Operations. Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her gray eyes scanning each of them with professional assessment. The polite fiction ends here. For the next 3 months, your days will be spent learning how the galaxy prefers to handle conflicts. Your evenings will be spent learning how humans actually handle them. She activated a holographic display that showed tactical formations Maya had never seen before. Every species in the CDI evolved from cooperation and mutual benefit. Even the Korath, who look like warriors, developed their strength for construction and heavy labor, not combat. Their idea of warfare involves direct confrontation between equally matched forces following agreed-upon rules. The display shifted to show battle scenarios that made Maya's stomach clench. Humans evolved as persistence hunters and tribal competitors. We developed warfare as asymmetric confrontation, designed to achieve total victory with minimal resources. Ambush tactics, psychological warfare, strategic deception, and the willingness to accept casualties for long-term advantage. These concepts are alien to most galactic species. James raised his hand. Ma'am, if we're so different, why does the CDI want us? Because sometimes the galaxy encounters threats that don't play by civilized rules, Hayes replied. Pirates who use captured civilians as shields, rogue AI systems that view mercy as inefficiency, hostile species from outside our local galactic group who see cooperation as weakness to be exploited. She brought up new images, sensor readings from recent border incidents, grainy footage of unknown ships using tactics that confused CDI forces. 3 months ago, an entire Valen trade convoy disappeared near the neutral zone. No distress signals, no debris field, no survivors. 2 weeks later, a Korath mining station went silent. When CDI forces investigated, they found the station intact but completely abandoned, with signs that the population had been herded away like livestock. Maya felt ice in her veins. Slavers? Worse. Intelligence suggests we're dealing with a species that views other intelligent life as resources to be harvested. They study their targets, learn their weaknesses, then strike with precision that completely bypasses traditional defense strategies. Standard CDI peacekeeping protocols are useless against an enemy that doesn't want to negotiate. Colonel Hayes gestured to the training equipment around them. This is why Phoenix Squadron exists. When diplomacy fails and conventional tactics aren't enough, the CDI needs personnel who understand warfare at its most fundamental level. You're not here to be soldiers in the traditional sense. You're here to be human. She began distributing equipment that looked far more sophisticated than anything they'd seen during regular training. Your code names will be drawn from human military history, names that carry the weight of strategic genius, tactical innovation, and the willingness to do whatever victory requires. Miss Chen, your designation will be Hannibal. Maya's breath caught. Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who crossed the Alps with elephants, who brought Rome to its knees through brilliant tactical innovation and sheer audacity. Ma'am, I'm not sure I'm qualified for that kind of responsibility. None of you are yet. Hayes smiled grimly. But by the time we're finished with you, you'll understand what it means to think like a human, in a galaxy full of reasonable species. Because when unreasonable enemies come calling, being reasonable gets everyone killed. The first evening session lasted 4 hours. They studied historical battles, analyzed strategic thinking, and began learning tactical concepts that had no equivalent in standard CDI doctrine. As Maya finally made her way back to her quarters, her mind reeled with new knowledge and troubling implications. Tomorrow she would return to regular training, learning alongside aliens who had never known war as humans understood it. But tonight, she carried the weight of her new codename and the growing realization that humanity's greatest strength might be the very thing the galaxy hoped they would never need to use. 3 weeks into training, Maya had fallen into a rhythm that left her exhausted but oddly exhilarated. Days were spent in standard CDI exercises with her mixed species cohort, learning proper protocols for everything from first contact situations to mediating trade disputes. Evenings belonged to Phoenix Squadron's hidden curriculum, where she discovered that human military thinking operated on principles her alien classmates would find disturbing. The contrast became starkly apparent during a joint tactical exercise in the station's simulation bay. The scenario involved a hostage situation on a civilian transport. Raiders had seized a passenger ship and were demanding ransom while threatening to kill captives if their deadline wasn't met. Commander Thrix observed as teams of recruits took turns attempting resolution. The Valen team tried harmonic negotiation, using their natural energy manipulation to project calming influences through the ship's hull. The Karath team proposed a straightforward assault, overwhelming the raiders with superior strength while accepting that some casualties were inevitable. The Zephyrian team suggested rapid infiltration, using their speed and small size to disable the raiders before they could react. When Phoenix Squadron's turn came, Maya found herself designated as team leader, a rotation system that had already seen each human take command during different scenarios. She studied the tactical display, noting ship layout, raider positions, and hostage locations. Her teammates waited for orders, and she could feel the weight of their code names. Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Sun Tzu, Rommel, Patton, MacArthur, and her own burden of Hannibal. First phase, she said quietly, knowing their communications were being monitored. Sarah, I need you to hack into the ship's life support systems. Not to disable them, but to introduce trace amounts of mild sedatives into the air circulation. Nothing dangerous, just enough to slow reaction time slightly. The Valen recruit next to her gasped softly. You would drug the entire ship, including the hostages? Low-dose, fast-metabolizing compounds, Maya replied, not taking her eyes off the display. The hostages will experience mild drowsiness. The raiders, who are already operating under stress, will have noticeably impaired judgment within 20 minutes. Continuing, she turned to Elena, while that's processing, you'll use microdrones to map exact positions of all raiders and hostages. James and David, you'll prepare entry points at 3 different locations. Not where you plan to enter, but where you want the raiders to think you might enter. Commander Thrix's scaled brow furrowed. Deception tactics? Phase 2 begins when the sedatives take effect. Chenwei and the Santos twins will create a distraction at the false entry points. Enough noise and apparent preparation to draw raider attention. Meanwhile, Elena will deploy flashbang devices through the ventilation system, targeting only sections where raiders are positioned. And the actual assault? Asked one of the Korath recruits. Maya smiled, and several alien observers shifted uncomfortably. There was something predatory in the expression that reminded them this species had evolved from hunters. There won't be an assault. By the time the flashbangs detonate, The raiders will be disoriented, drowsy, and focused on the wrong locations. Sarah will have used their own communication system to broadcast surrender demands in their native language. Demands that include information only someone with intimate knowledge of their personal lives would know. How would you obtain such information? Instructor Valdris asked. During the 20 minutes while they're breathing sedatives, our microdrones will be scanning their personal effects, recording conversations, and building psychological profiles. The surrender broadcast will reference their families, their financial situations, their fears. Most sapient species respond predictably to personal psychological pressure. The simulation bay fell quiet. Finally, Commander Thrick spoke. You would manipulate their emotions about their loved ones. I would give them compelling personal reasons to surrender rather than risk their lives in a fight they're no longer capable of winning. Maya corrected. No shots fired, no casualties on either side, hostages released unharmed. The simulation ran and Phoenix Squadron's approach worked exactly as Maya had outlined. The raiders surrendered within 40 minutes, confused and demoralized but physically unharmed. The hostages were released with nothing worse than mild headaches from the sedatives. Efficient, Instructor Valdris noted, but his tone suggested efficiency wasn't necessarily a positive trait. However, your methods raise significant ethical concerns about consent, psychological manipulation, and the use of chemical agents on civilians. That evening's Phoenix Squadron session focused on the reactions they'd received. Colonel Hayes seemed satisfied with their performance, but Captain Webb looked troubled. You did well today, Hayes began, but you also learned an important lesson about operating in a galactic community that doesn't think the way humans do. What did you observe about the other species' reactions? Elena spoke first. They were disturbed by the psychological manipulation. The idea of using personal information to pressure enemies into surrender bothered them more than the prospect of a firefight. The Valen actually looked sick when Maya mentioned drugging the whole ship, added James. Even though our approach was less harmful than direct assault, because, said Captain Webb, most galactic species evolved in environments where individual survival depended on group cooperation. The idea of using deception, manipulation, or asymmetric advantages feels fundamentally wrong to them. It violates their basic understanding of how conflicts should be resolved. Hayes nodded grimly. This is why Phoenix Squadron operates in secrecy. The CDI needs human tactical thinking, but most of the galactic community would be horrified if they understood what that really means. They want us to solve problems they can't handle, but they don't want to know how we solve them. She activated a new tactical display showing real intelligence reports, which brings us to your next phase of training. We've identified the species responsible for the missing colonies. Initial contact attempts were made 3 days ago. The display showed grainy footage of sleek dark ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They call themselves the Devourers. Our diplomatic team tried standard first contact protocols, peaceful overtures, trade offers, cultural exchange possibilities. The footage shifted to show the aftermath. Maya felt her stomach clench as she saw the diplomatic vessel drifting powerless, its hull intact, but showing signs of forced entry. The diplomatic team was taken alive, Hayes continued, along with their ship, their equipment, and all their protocols for contacting other CDI vessels. Intelligence suggests the Devourers are using captured personnel to study our methods, our technology, and our weaknesses. Chen Wei leaned forward. How long before they learn enough to threaten major population centers? Conservative estimates give us 6 weeks before they're ready to move against defended systems. The CDI Council is debating whether to mobilize the fleet for conventional warfare or attempt further diplomatic solutions. Captain Webb stood, which is why Phoenix Squadron's training timeline has been accelerated. You have 2 weeks to master advanced human tactical doctrine. Then you'll be deployed as part of a reconnaissance mission to locate the Devourer base of operations. Reconnaissance? Maya asked. Information gathering, target assessment, and if necessary, tactical disruption using methods that conventional CDI forces couldn't conceive of, much less execute. Hayes smiled coldly. The Devourers think they understand how galactic civilization operates because they've studied our peaceful species. They have no idea what humans are capable of when we stop pretending to be harmless. That night, Maya lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, her mind churning with implications. In 2 weeks, she would be deployed on a real mission against an enemy, that specialized in studying and exploiting their opponents' weaknesses. The Devourers had captured diplomats, studied peaceful species, and learned to counter conventional tactics. But they had never encountered humans operating without restraint, using the full spectrum of strategic thinking that had made her species the apex predators of their homeworld. They were about to learn that some prey, when cornered, revealed themselves to be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The stealth ship Shadowhawk hung in the darkness between stars, its hull designed to absorb sensor sweeps and emissions that might reveal its presence. Phoenix Squadron occupied the vessel's cramped mission bay, making final preparations for what Colonel Hayes had termed active reconnaissance. A euphemism that everyone understood meant they were going to war. Maya checked her equipment one final time, noting how different it was from standard CDI gear, where regular peacekeeping forces carried stunning weapons and restraint devices. Phoenix Squadron's loadout included items that would horrify most galactic citizens. Her tactical scanner could identify biological weak points across 17 different species. Her sidearm offered lethal and non-lethal settings, with effectiveness ratings that assumed enemies would not surrender gracefully. Most disturbing of all, her mission pack contained psychological warfare tools, devices designed to exploit the specific fears and social instincts of different alien species. 30 minutes to insertion point, announced Lieutenant Vasquez from the pilot's seat. Elena had been assigned as their transport specialist, having demonstrated an unusual aptitude for improvised flying during training exercises that violated most safety regulations. Captain Webb moved through the bay, conducting final briefings with each team member. When he reached Maya, his expression was grim. "You understand your role, Hannibal? Tactical command, strategic assessment, and mission adaptation as circumstances require," she replied. "But sir, I have to ask, why me? Alexander and Napoleon have more leadership experience, and Sun Tzu has better theoretical knowledge." Webb was quiet for a moment, studying her with eyes that had seen too much combat. Because Hannibal was the one who proved that conventional wisdom could be overcome through sheer audacity and tactical innovation. He took impossible situations and found ways to turn them into victories that no one thought possible. He gestured toward the mission briefing display showing their target, a rogue planetoid in an abandoned system where Devourer activity had been detected. Were 8 humans in a modified courier ship, approaching an enemy base that intelligence estimates contained several thousand hostiles with superior technology and complete knowledge of our standard operating procedures. By any reasonable measure, this mission should be impossible. And if it really is impossible, then we make sure the galaxy learns something valuable from our failure. Webb's smile held no warmth. But I don't think it will come to that. The Devourers have studied peaceful species and their predictable methods. They have no idea what they're dealing with now. 20 minutes later, Maya found herself pressed against a bulkhead as the Shadowhawk executed a series of maneuvers that would have been impossible without Elena's disregard for manufacturer safety recommendations. They were using the planetoid's irregular rotation and dense asteroid field to mask their approach, taking advantage of sensor shadows and gravitational distortions in ways that assumed their pilot was either insane or superhuman. "Contact," reported James from the sensor station. "Multiple ships in orbit around the planetoid. Configuration matches Devourer vessels, but I'm reading some CDI signatures too." "Captured ships," Webb confirmed grimly. "They're using our own technology against us." "How many?" 12 Devourer vessels, 4 CDI ships of various classes. No sign of the missing diplomatic team, but there are life signs aboard the captured vessels. Maya studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating angles of approach, defensive positions, and potential weaknesses. The Devourer formation was professionally arranged, overlapping fields of fire, good sensor coverage, and quick response capabilities. They had clearly learned effective fleet tactics from studying their captives. "Elena, can you get us to the planetoid surface without triggering their perimeter sensors?" "Define without triggering," Elena replied cheerfully. "Because I can definitely get us down there, but they're going to know something happened." "Explain." "Their sensor grid is designed to detect incoming ships and energy signatures. It's not optimized for detecting falling rocks." Elena's grin was visible in the reflection of her control panel. "I can shut down our engines and use only maneuvering thrusters. Make us look like debris from the asteroid field. We'll hit atmosphere hard and fast, then use emergency atmospheric braking at the last possible moment. Webb winced. Survival probability? For the ship? Maybe 60%. For us? Depends on how good our restraint systems are and whether anyone's prone to motion sickness. Do it. What followed was 15 minutes of controlled falling that redefined Maya's understanding of terror. Elena guided their powerless ship through the asteroid field like a piece of debris, using gravity and momentum to carry them toward the planetoid, while occasionally firing micro-thrusters to adjust their trajectory. When they finally hit atmosphere, the ship began shaking so violently that Maya thought her teeth might come loose. Emergency braking in 3, 2, now. Elena's voice was somehow steady despite the chaos around them. The ship's engines fired at maximum power for exactly 12 seconds, just long enough to prevent them from becoming a crater. They hit the surface hard, bounced twice, and slid to a stop in what appeared to be an abandoned mining pit. "Everyone alive?" Webb called out as emergency lighting flickered on. Groans and confirmations came from around the bay. Maya checked herself for injuries and found nothing worse than bruises that would hurt for days. Around her, Phoenix Squadron was conducting similar assessments, with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for situations where everything went wrong. "Surface. Analysis complete," reported Chen Wei from his scanner station. "We're approximately 15 kilometers from the main Devourer installation. The facility appears to be built into a natural cave system, with multiple levels extending deep underground." Maya studied the scan results, noting defensive positions, entry points, and the complete lack of cover between their crash site and the target. "James, what can you tell me about their technology?" "Advanced, but not beyond our understanding. Energy weapons, force fields, and sensor systems that operate on principles similar to our own. The concerning part is that they seem to have integrated captured CDI equipment into their existing infrastructure, meaning they're learning," Webb said grimly. "Every piece of our technology they capture makes them more dangerous. We need to move fast before they have time to fully analyze what they've taken." Maya gathered the team around a holographic display showing the cave system layout. Standard approach would be to find the least defended entrance and attempt infiltration. But that's exactly what they'll expect from CDI forces. She began marking positions on the display. "Instead, we're going to do something that violates every principle of sound military doctrine. We're going to attack their strongest position at the worst possible time, with completely inadequate forces." Sun Tzu, Chen Wei, looked puzzled. "That seems strategically inadvisable." "It's strategically insane," Maya agreed, "which is exactly why it might work. The Devourers have studied how civilized species conduct warfare. They understand rational tactical thinking, calculated risk assessment, and logical strategic planning. They have no frame of reference for dealing with an enemy that deliberately chooses the most unreasonable possible approach." She highlighted the main entrance to the cave system, heavily defended and clearly designed to channel attackers into killing zones. "We're going to assault their primary defensive position using tactics they've never encountered before. Not because it's a good idea, but because it's such a terrible idea that they won't have planned for it." Alexander, Marcus Santos, was grinning. "How terrible an idea are we talking about?" Maya's answering smile made several team members uncomfortable. "We're going to convince them that 8 humans are actually the advance force for a massive CDI invasion fleet. Then, while they're preparing for an assault that will never come, we're going to rescue the hostages, destroy their research data, and escape using methods that will leave them completely unable to explain what happened." The mission bay fell quiet, except for the ship's emergency system cycling air. Finally, Captain Webb spoke. "I want detailed plans within the hour. If we're going to do something this insane, we're going to do it perfectly." As Phoenix Squadron began planning their impossible assault, Maya felt the weight of her codename settling around her shoulders. Hannibal had done the impossible by bringing elephants across the Alps. Now she had to prove that humans could do the impossible by bringing war to an enemy that thought they understood what war meant. The assault began at exactly 0347 local time, during what intelligence had identified as the Devourer equivalent of a shift change. Maya crouched behind a rocky outcropping 2 kilometers from the cave entrance, watching as Phoenix Squadron's carefully orchestrated deception unfolded. Phase 1 had already succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. Elena had rigged their crashed ship to broadcast false communications, carefully crafted messages designed to sound like encrypted military chatter between multiple CDI fleet elements. The transmission spoke of preliminary, reconnaissance, orbital strike coordinates, and primary, assault wave deployment schedules. Any species that had studied CDI protocols would recognize the terminology and assume they were intercepting real strategic communications. Devourer response is immediate. James reported through their encrypted comm system. I'm reading massive energy signatures from inside the cave complex. They're powering up defensive systems and what looks like a planetary shield generator. Maya smiled grimly. The Devourers were preparing for exactly the kind of massive, overwhelming assault that civilized species would logically employ against a fixed defensive position. They were allocating resources, positioning forces, and configuring equipment to repel an invasion fleet that existed only in their imagination. Alexander Napoleon, execute Phase 2. Marcus and Maria Santos moved with the fluid coordination that came from growing up together on a frontier world where survival depended on teamwork. They had spent the past hour positioning carefully disguised explosive charges around the main cave entrance. Not enough to actually breach the Devourer defenses, but precisely calculated to create the impression of a probing attack by advance forces. The explosions, when they came, were spectacular. Brilliant flashes lit up the cave mouth as shaped charges detonated against the energy barriers protecting the entrance. The barriers held exactly as Maya had planned, but the light show would be visible from orbit and clearly indicated that ground forces were testing defensive capabilities. Patton, Rommel, MacArthur, your turn. David, Elena, and Chen Wei began the next phase of the deception. Using portable holographic projectors, they created false sensor signatures at multiple locations around the planetoid. To Devourer surveillance, it would appear that CDI forces were conducting reconnaissance in force, probing for weaknesses while preparing multiple assault vectors. Maya watched the cave entrance through her tactical scope, noting how Devourer forces were repositioning to meet threats that didn't exist. Energy weapons were being moved to cover the false contact points. Shield generators were being reconfigured to protect against orbital bombardment. Most importantly, internal security was being reduced as personnel were reassigned to external defense. Sun Tzu, how are our new friends reacting? Chen Wei's voice came through clearly despite the electronic warfare countermeasures the Devourers had activated. They're broadcasting surrender demands on multiple frequencies, demanding that CDI forces withdraw or face the consequences of attacking a fortified position. Standard psychological warfare tactics designed to convince us that resistance is hopeless. Any response to our fleet communications? They've tried to jam our transmissions twice, but Elena's frequency-hopping protocols are staying ahead of their countermeasures. As far as they know, we're still coordinating with orbital support that could arrive at any moment. Maya checked her chronometer. Phase 3 would begin in exactly 7 minutes. Time to coincide with what their intercepted communications suggested would be the arrival of the main assault force. Everyone ready for the real mission? Confirmations came back from around the perimeter. While the Devourers focused on external threats and prepared for massive assault, Phoenix Squadron was about to do something no reasonable military force would attempt: infiltrate a heavily defended position through its most dangerous entrance. During the middle of a battle using tactics that assumed the enemy would be too confused to respond effectively. Remember, Maya said as they began moving toward the cave entrance, we're not trying to fight our way in. We're going to walk in like we belong there, complete our objectives, and leave before they realize what happened. The approach took 40 minutes of careful movement through terrain that offered minimal cover. Maya led her team along a route that intelligence had identified as a maintenance access for the cave's atmospheric processors. Not defended because it was too small and exposed to be tactically relevant, but large enough for humans willing to take insane risks. As they reached the entrance perimeter, Maya activated her psychological warfare package. The device began broadcasting subsonic frequencies designed to trigger stress responses in the Devourer species. Nothing harmful, but enough to increase anxiety levels and reduce decision-making capabilities among personnel who were already dealing with an apparent multi-vector assault. Alexander, can you confirm guard positions? Marcus Santos used microdrones to map the entrance area, noting that most of the Devourer guards had been repositioned to face outward toward the expected assault. The few remaining internal guards were focused on monitoring communications and coordinating defensive responses. Minimal internal security, he reported. Looks like they've committed everything to perimeter defense. Maya smiled. The Devourers had fallen for the oldest trick in human military thinking. They were fighting the war they expected instead of the war they were actually facing. Move out. What followed was a demonstration of why human special operations forces had been legendary on Earth long before they reached the stars. Phoenix Squadron moved through the cave complex like ghosts, using darkness, misdirection, and the enemy's own confusion to remain undetected. When they encountered guards, they used non-lethal takedown methods that left their targets unconscious but alive, maintaining the illusion that no infiltration had occurred. The Devourer facility was larger than intelligence had suggested, with multiple levels extending deep into the planetoid's core. Maya led her team through corridors lined with equipment that clearly showed the influence of captured CDI technology, hybrid systems that combined Devourer engineering with stolen innovations from across the galaxy. Target located, Sarah whispered through the comm system. She had found the detention area where captured CDI personnel were being held, 17 prisoners, including the entire diplomatic team. They appear to be unharmed but sedated. Research facility located, added James from another corridor. Massive data storage systems, analytical equipment, and what looks like interrogation chambers. They've been systematically studying our technology and tactics. Maya felt a cold anger building in her chest. The Devourers weren't just raiders or conquerors. They were predators who specialized in understanding their prey before consuming them. They had turned scientific analysis into a weapon of war, using knowledge itself to make their victims helpless. Napoleon, can you access their research data? Maria Santos was already working at one of the analytical terminals, her fingers flying over alien controls that she had somehow learned to operate during their brief infiltration. Incredible. They've built detailed profiles of every major CDI species, psychological weaknesses, tactical preferences, biological vulnerabilities. They know exactly how to defeat us in conventional warfare. Copy everything you can, then prepare to destroy the rest. Maya switched to squadron-wide communications. Sun Tzu Patton, secure the prisoners for extraction. Rommel MacArthur, prepare demolition charges for critical systems. We have 10 minutes before they realize what's happening. The rescue proceeded with mechanical efficiency that would have made their trainers proud. Phoenix Squadron had drilled these procedures countless times, always assuming they would be operating under impossible conditions with inadequate resources. The reality proved to be exactly as difficult as their worst-case scenarios. Maya. Captain Webb's voice came through on a priority channel. We have a problem. Devourer forces are beginning to realize that the orbital assault isn't coming. They're starting to redeploy internal security. Maya checked her tactical display, noting enemy movement patterns that suggested the deception was beginning to unravel. How long before they figure out what we're really doing? Conservative estimate. 20 minutes before they start conducting internal sweeps. Optimistic estimate? We're already out of time. Maya looked around at the alien facility, calculating extraction routes and defensive positions. They had accomplished their primary objectives. The prisoners were secured, the research data was copied, and the facility's analytical capabilities would soon be destroyed. But getting out alive was going to require one more application of human tactical thinking. Change of plans, she announced to Phoenix Squadron. We're not sneaking out. We're going to convince them to let us leave. Maya stood in the central command chamber of the Devourer facility, surrounded by alien technology and the unconscious forms of 17 rescued CDI personnel. Around her, Phoenix Squadron maintained defensive positions while she implemented what Captain Webb would later describe as the most audacious bluff in human military history. Sun Tzu, are you ready with the facility's communication system? Chen Wei looked up from the alien control panel he had somehow managed to interface with their equipment. Ready, Hannibal. I can broadcast on all frequencies, including their internal command network. Perfect. In 60 seconds, I'm going to deliver a message that will either get us all killed or convince the Devourers to let us walk out of here with our prisoners. Maya activated her translator and checked her tactical display one final time. Either way, it should be interesting. The message she was about to send would violate every principle of diplomatic protocol. psychological warfare ethics, and basic sanity that the galactic community had established. But it was also perfectly calculated to exploit what Phoenix Squadron had learned about Devourer psychology during their infiltration. All stations, this is Strike Team Hannibal of the Human Strategic Operations Division. Maya's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had absolute confidence in their position. We have completed our primary mission objectives within your facility. 17 CDI personnel have been secured. Your research database has been compromised, and your analytical capabilities are scheduled for destruction. She paused, allowing that information to sink in before continuing. However, we are prepared to negotiate a mutually beneficial resolution to this situation. Through their stolen access to the facility's internal communications, Phoenix Squadron could hear the confusion spreading through Devourer ranks. Guard units were reporting negative contact with any infiltrators. Sensor operators were insisting that no breach had been detected. Command personnel were demanding explanations for how humans had apparently walked through their security undetected. You're probably wondering how a small team accomplished what your intelligence suggested would require a major fleet action, Maya continued, her tone conversational despite the circumstances. The answer is simple. You've been studying the wrong humans. Chen Wei gave her a thumbs up, indicating that Devourer forces had stopped their redeployment and were focusing entirely on her broadcast. Good. Confusion and uncertainty were exactly what she needed. Your research profiles are quite impressive, but they focus exclusively on humans operating within CDI protocols. Peaceful humans, diplomatic humans, humans who follow galactic civilization's rules of engagement. Maya's smile was audible in her voice. You've never encountered humans who stop pretending to be civilized. The genius of the bluff lay in its fundamental truth. Everything Maya was telling them was technically accurate, which would make it impossible for their analytical systems to detect deception. The Devourers had indeed studied the wrong humans, and Phoenix Squadron had indeed accomplished their mission, using methods that no galactic species would consider reasonable. Here's what's going to happen, Maya announced with the casual confidence of someone dictating terms to a defeated enemy. We're going to walk out of your facility with our rescued personnel. You're going to allow us to reach our extraction point without interference. In return, we'll leave your base intact and your personnel unharmed. She paused again, letting tension build before delivering the critical element of her psychological operation. Refuse these terms and you'll discover why humans were once considered the most dangerous species on their homeworld. We've been very polite so far, operating with restraint appropriate to a rescue mission. But if you force us to treat this as a combat operation, you'll learn why human military doctrine focuses on achieving total victory rather than negotiated settlements. Through the facility's sensors, Maya could see Devourer forces hesitating, uncertain how to respond to threats that fell completely outside their understanding of how conflicts were supposed to escalate. Their entire strategic philosophy was based on studying enemies and exploiting weaknesses, but they had no data on how to counter an opponent who openly admitted to using irrational tactics. To demonstrate our capabilities, Maya continued, we'll now provide a small tactical exhibition. That was the signal for Phoenix Squadron to execute the final phase of their impossible plan. Around the facility, carefully placed charges began detonating in precisely calculated sequence, not enough to cause serious structural damage, but sufficient to disable critical systems and demonstrate that humans had been moving freely through areas the Devourers considered secure. Lights went out in sections of the base. Communication arrays went offline. Most importantly, the facility's main analytical computer suffered what appeared to be a catastrophic system failure, taking with it years of accumulated research data on CDI species and tactics. As you can see, Maya said as emergency lighting flickered throughout the command center, we've had access to your entire facility for quite some time. What you're experiencing now is a gentle demonstration of our capabilities. Escalate this situation and the next demonstration will be considerably less gentle. Elena's voice came through on a priority channel. Hannibal, Devourer forces are pulling back from the main corridors. Looks like they're creating a withdrawal route. Perfect. The Devourers were reacting exactly as Maya had hoped. Faced with an opponent who operated outside their analytical framework, they were choosing to avoid confrontation rather than risk encountering capabilities they couldn't predict or counter. Excellent decision, Maya announced, genuinely pleased that her bluff was working. Phoenix Squadron will now extract with the rescued personnel. Any attempt to interfere with our withdrawal will be interpreted as a declaration of active hostilities, with all the unpleasant consequences that implies. What followed was the most surreal military extraction in recorded history. Phoenix Squadron walked through the Devourer facility with 17 unconscious CDI personnel, using improvised stretchers and medical equipment liberated from the base's own medical facilities. Devourer guards watched from defensive positions but made no attempt to intervene, apparently unwilling to test the humans' implied threats. "This is absolutely insane," Captain Webb muttered through the comm system as they made their way toward the surface. "They could overwhelm us with numbers alone, but they're just letting us leave." "Because they're analytical thinkers," Maya replied, helping to carry one of the rescued diplomats. "Their entire approach to warfare is based on understanding their opponents and exploiting predictable weaknesses. We've presented them with a tactical situation they can't analyze, using methods they can't predict, with capabilities they can't assess. They reach the cave entrance to find Devourer forces arranged in defensive positions that carefully avoided blocking their path to the extraction point. The aliens watched with what appeared to be professional curiosity as 8 humans carried 17 rescued prisoners across open ground toward their crashed ship. "Elena, please tell me you can get that wreck airborne." "Already working on it," Elena called back from the ship. "We lost some non-essential systems during the landing, but the important parts are still functional. More or less." As they loaded the rescued personnel aboard the Shadowhawk, Maya found herself reflecting on what they had accomplished. Phoenix Squadron had infiltrated a heavily defended enemy facility, rescued 17 prisoners, destroyed critical research data, and escaped without firing a single shot in anger. They had done it using nothing but human psychology, tactical audacity, and the galaxy's complete lack of understanding about what humans were truly capable of. "All personnel aboard and secured," reported James, as the ship's engines began their startup sequence. "Course laid in for CDI space. Estimated arrival in 47 hours. Maya settled into her crash couch as Elena began the complex process of getting their damaged ship off the ground without having it fall apart. Through the viewport, she could see Devourer forces maintaining their positions, still apparently unwilling to risk engaging an enemy whose capabilities they couldn't predict. "Webb to Hannibal," came the captain's voice through the comm system. "Outstanding work. How did you know they would let us walk out?" Maya considered the question as their ship lifted away from the planetoid, leaving behind confused enemies and rescued allies. "Because they're not human," she finally answered. "They think like scientists and strategists, always trying to understand before they act. But sometimes understanding is less important than simply having the courage to do what needs to be done." As the Shadowhawk cleared the planetoid's gravity well and jumped to hyperspace, Maya realized that she finally understood what Captain Webb had meant about carrying ancient weight. The codename Hannibal wasn't just about tactical brilliance or strategic innovation. It was about the uniquely human willingness to attempt the impossible when the situation demanded it. Behind them, the Devourers were left to explain to their superiors how 8 humans had walked into their most secure facility, accomplished their objectives, and left without sustaining a single casualty. It was 6 months after the Devourer incident, Maya stood once again in the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching ships from across the galaxy arrive for what the media was calling the Strategic Defense Conference. The view was spectacular as always, but the context had changed dramatically since her first day as a recruit. The rescue of the diplomatic team and the intelligence gathered from the Devourer facility had sent shockwaves through the galactic community. For the first time, civilized species were forced to confront the reality that there were threats in the universe that couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or deterred through conventional peacekeeping methods. "Quite a view," said a familiar voice behind her. Maya turned to find Captain Webb approaching, wearing the insignia of his recent promotion to colonel. The success of Phoenix Squadron's mission had earned recognition for the entire Human Strategic Operations Program, though most of the galactic community still didn't understand exactly what had happened on that distant planetoid. "I never thanked you properly," Maya said, "for believing that humans could be more than farmers and artists." Webb joined her at the viewport, watching as a massive Korath dreadnought moved into formation alongside sleek Valen research vessels. The galaxy's changing, Chen. 6 months ago, the idea of a joint military operation between species would have been unthinkable. Now they're creating integrated battle groups and sharing tactical intelligence, because they finally understand that cooperation includes fighting together, not just working together. Partly, but also because they've realized that humans bring something to the Alliance that they can't provide themselves. Webb gestured toward the assembled fleet. Every one of those ships now carries human strategic advisors. Phoenix Squadron graduates are training mixed species units in what the CDI politely calls asymmetric defense protocols. Maya smiled at the euphemism. Asymmetric defense protocols was diplomatic language for teaching alien species how to think like humans when facing impossible odds. How are the other species adapting to human military doctrine? Better than expected, though they still find some of our methods disturbing. The Valen contingent nearly withdrew from the program when they learned about psychological warfare techniques. The Korath, surprisingly, have embraced human tactical thinking. Turns out their species has more capacity for strategic deception than anyone realized. Through the viewport, Maya could see smaller ships moving between the capital vessels, Phoenix Squadron units conducting training exercises with their alien counterparts. Each ship carried a mixed crew, but the human contingent bore call signs that carried the weight of military history: Caesar, Patton, Rommel, MacArthur, and dozens of others drawn from humanity's long tradition of strategic innovation. What about the Devourers? Maya asked. Any word on their response to losing their research facility? Webb's expression grew serious. Intelligence suggests they've withdrawn to territories beyond the galactic rim, probably regrouping and developing new strategies. The facility you destroyed contained years of accumulated data on how to defeat civilized species. Without that information, they're back to direct observation and analysis, which gives us time to prepare. Exactly. And when they return, they'll face something they've never encountered before: a galactic alliance that includes humans operating without restraint. Webb smiled grimly. They studied peaceful species and learned how to exploit cooperation and reason, but they have no idea how to counter an enemy that's willing to be unreasonable in defense of their allies. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Webb activated his personal display, reading a message that made his eyebrows rise. Speaking of unreasonable, you're being summoned to the conference chamber. It seems the CDI Council wants to meet the human who convinced an entire enemy base to let her walk away with their prisoners. Maya felt a flutter of nervousness. She had heard about the Council. Representatives from every major galactic civilization, beings whose species had been exploring space when humans were still discovering fire. What do they want to know? How we did it. How they can learn to do it. And probably whether humans can be trusted with the kind of influence we're gaining in galactic affairs. Webb's expression grew thoughtful. They're smart enough to recognize that human strategic thinking could revolutionize galactic defense, but wise enough to worry about what that might mean for their peaceful civilization. As they made their way through the station's corridors, Maya noticed the changes that had occurred since her recruitment. Human personnel were more numerous and held positions of greater responsibility. Alien officers wore communication badges that included human tactical advisors in their command structures. Most significantly, the very atmosphere of the station had shifted from peaceful cooperation to determined preparation. The conference chamber was impressive, a circular amphitheater designed to accommodate the diverse physiological needs of multiple species. Representatives from 17 different civilizations occupied specialized seating arrangements, their attention focused on a central platform where Maya was apparently expected to speak. Commander Thrix, the Saurak officer who had processed her initial application, stood to make introductions. Honored delegates, I present Special Operations Coordinator Maya Chen, designated Hannibal of Phoenix Squadron, architect of the successful rescue operation against Devourer forces. Maya approached the platform, acutely aware that she was about to address beings whose civilizations had millennia of experience in galactic affairs. But as she looked around the chamber, she realized something important. For all their wisdom and experience, they needed what humans could provide. Honored representatives, she began. 6 months ago, I was a xenobiology student who thought she might like to help maintain galactic peace. Today I stand before you as evidence that humans have capabilities your species may find both valuable and disturbing. She activated the chamber's holographic display, showing tactical data from the Devourer mission. The rescue operation succeeded not because of superior technology or overwhelming force, but because humans are willing to attempt strategies that other species would consider irrational. We succeeded because we were unreasonable. A violin representative's crest shimmered with concern. Coordinator Chen, your methods achieved impressive results, but they also involve deception, psychological manipulation, and threats of violence. How do we reconcile such tactics with the principles of galactic civilization? Maya had expected this question and had spent considerable time preparing her answer. Because sometimes civilization requires the willingness to be uncivilized in its defense. The Devourers studied your peaceful nature and planned to exploit it. They counted on your reasonableness, your preference for negotiation over confrontation, your assumption that all conflicts could be resolved through understanding. She gestured toward the tactical display, highlighting the rescued prisoners. 17 beings are alive today because humans were willing to abandon reason in favor of audacity. Their civilizations will continue to exist because we chose to be the kind of dangerous that your species cannot imagine being. The chamber fell quiet for a long moment. Finally, an elderly Korath commander spoke, his voice carrying the authority of decades in military service. Young human, what you describe sounds very much like what our species might call controlled savagery. The ability to become dangerous precisely when danger is required. That's not an inaccurate description, sir. Then perhaps, the Korath continued, the galaxy is fortunate that humans chose to become our allies rather than our enemies. Maya felt the weight of that statement settle around her. It was both a compliment and a warning. Recognition that human capabilities were valued but also acknowledged as potentially threatening to the galactic order. Honored delegates, she said, humans didn't choose to become your allies in spite of our capacity for warfare. We chose to become your allies because of it. Every human in Phoenix Squadron carries the weight of our species' military history, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. We remember what we're capable of so that we can choose to be better. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from species that had welcomed humanity into galactic civilization, despite having every reason to fear what humans might become. The Devourers will return, probably with new strategies and better preparation. When they do, they'll face something that no predator species has ever encountered. Civilized beings who remember how to be uncivilized when necessary. Peaceful species who can choose to be dangerous. Reasonable beings who are willing to be unreasonable. In defense of everything we've built together. And so, the conference concluded and representatives began discussing integration protocols for human strategic advisors. Maya realized that her enrollment in the CDI might have been recent, but the weight her codename carried was indeed ancient. She was part of a tradition that stretched back to humanity's earliest conflicts, but also part of something new. The evolution of that tradition into something that could protect rather than conquer. The galaxy had gained defenders who understood that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to remember how to wage war. And for the first time since joining Phoenix Squadron, Maya felt truly confident that when the next threat emerged from the darkness between stars, it would find humanity ready with both the wisdom to seek peace and the willingness to fight for it. Her enrollment was recent, but her codename carried the weight of every human who had ever chosen to stand between civilization and chaos. That weight was no longer a burden. It was a promise that the galaxy would never face its enemies alone.